I believed that I had imagined it. I believed that I had imagined it. I imagined it. An ordinary Tuesday was pierced by a paralyzing fear. It was only an ordinary Tuesday until evening, but still it was no different from any other cold Tuesday in January. I got up in the morning, saw my mom to the door, had breakfast, fed the fish, and left. School was a 20-minute walk from home, so it was cold and incredibly dark, despite it being only 7:30 a.m. The winter morning began with me getting my shoes completely covered in snow. Nothing unusual. The walk to school was never anything special, and this morning was no exception. Passing by a familiar, dark alley where nothing could be seen even on the brightest summer days, let alone in the cold winter, when some people even walk around with headlamps, I instinctively looked into the depths. Something was moving in the darkness, and rumbling sounds were coming from the depths. After standing in front of the darkness for a couple of minutes and reassuring myself that it was just homeless people huddling together, I pushed away the thought that if you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss will stare back at you. I moved on. Classes went by just like any other day of the week, any other time of year. Long and incredibly boring. A typical Tuesday. But not the evening. The evening began just as ordinary. I said goodbye to my teachers and classmates and hurried home. I never felt comfortable in the company of my peers, and, to be honest, their hobbies didn't really inspire me. That's why every evening after school, I wasn't eager to stay with them and spend my free time. And to be honest, they didn't like me very much either. Without any wild antics, I was never an outcast, so the worst that ever happened to me was having my backpack thrown into hard-to-reach places. Despite this, I hardly talked to anyone at school, let alone my classmates, so there was no reason to stay after school. Transferring to another school was too stressful. My mother was always at work and had neither the time nor the money for it. So I was content with the opportunity to get an education and never dreamed of anything more. The way home was along the same road as to school, through the alleys and past the eerie gateway, from which strange sounds had been coming in the morning. It was already quite late, so I didn't see the sun again and made my way home in the dark. When I reached the gateway, I heard sounds like the slurping of a large animal, loud, drawn out, and definitely not inviting anyone to approach their source. But I was always interested in all kinds of mysterious mysticism and mystical puzzles, and I didn't have any self-preservation instinct, or so I thought. So I decided to check out what was sloshing around in there. I took out my phone to light my way and avoid stepping on the numerous syringes with needles and human excrement, and slowly began to move forward through the doorway. It was small, literally a gap between two houses, filled with trash, garbage cans, and homeless people who had made this place their home. The sounds seemed to be coming from behind a distant trash can, and I approached it with trepidation and fear, resisting my animal instinct to run away and my rational mind telling me that I wouldn't find anything good there. Crunching snow under my boots, soaked through with sweat and excitement, I peeked behind the trash can. Two homeless people, I want to believe they were of different sexes, looked at me in surprise with their faces swollen from prolonged alcohol consumption. One of them had his pants down to his ankles, and the other, as far as I could tell, was at his waist. Fuck. The honorable gentlemen of no fixed abode quickly came to their senses and hurled insults, shouts, and even, it seemed, a bottle of something strong at me. Seemed, because I burst out laughing and quickly made a run for it. I don't know what I found so funny. Probably the contrast between the grim expectations of some monsters devouring the flesh of the dead wretch and the scene of the homeless people copulating. After running out of the doorway and past several houses, I was finally able to catch my breath. Still catching nervous giggles, I raised my head and froze in horror. I must have died for a moment, or maybe I was paralyzed, because I couldn't scream. I couldn't even get enough air into my lungs to scream. I just turned into a statue of horror, cold and merciless horror that gripped my body with a death grip. Just a few minutes ago, I was laughing at the absurdity. Now I was on the verge of death. I had always been afraid of the dark. Like all people, I was not afraid of the absence of light itself, but of what might lurk in it. It turned out that this fear was not so stupid after all. A huge, black figure, only vaguely human in appearance, loomed over me. It was about 2.5 meters tall. The creature, for it was clearly not a human being, had unusually long arms and legs, a huge head, and no face or anything like it. There was only a circular opening, which, incidentally, looked more like the barrel of a gun than a mouth. And the color, it was completely black, with no distinguishing features whatsoever. Nothing felt darker than it. Its enormous size left no room for doubt that it could be a human being. Not at all. Not even if it were on stilts and wearing a terrible black suit. No costume designer could achieve such blackness. All these thoughts raced through my head in a split second. I didn't have time to do anything before I heard a raspy voice. A drawn-out and incredibly squeaky voice. It sounded like someone closing an old, swollen wooden door that hadn't been oiled in a long time. "Can you see me?" Not the best way to start an acquaintance, you know. Not the best. Millions of different options ran through my head about what to do and what this was all about. Maybe it was just a prank, a projection, or a doll with a speaker. Probably the guys from school decided to joke around a little harder than usual. A little. No, they wouldn't do something like that. This didn't look like a child's prank. It was more like a professional horror quest like the one I had been to a few weeks earlier. But now I clearly understood that despite its reputation as the scariest quest in our city, that place was nowhere near this creature. "You can see me, can't you?" The creature loomed even lower over me, and I felt its warmth emanating from what humans call a torso. What was striking was that the creature gave off absolutely no smell. In contrast, I was clearly sweating profusely from the terror that had gripped me. If it's asking if I can see it, then not everyone can see it. I thought in the split seconds that felt like decades. Maybe if I don't react and just go home, this thing will just leave me alone. The chances were slim, but I had no other choice. And how could I even judge the chances? How could I think rationally in a situation like this? I had to almost force myself to move. It felt like more than a few hours had passed between our encounter and the moment I finally moved. Even though I knew that in reality no more than 2 minutes had passed, the feeling was very strong. With my legs feeling like jelly, I crossed the street and continued on my way home, slowly trying to fight the urge to run or just faint. Perhaps I should have turned around to make sure that the monster was no longer following me, but I was too scared that it would be right behind me and that if I turned around, I would bump right into it, unable to hold back a scream, and then it would definitely realize that I could see it. To me, it seemed like the worst thing that could ever happen. I made it home at that pace. I was shaking terribly and walking on tiptoes, hoping to hear, or rather, not hear, someone's footsteps and that creaky voice behind me. But I didn't hear anything on my way home. 15 minutes later, I thought it was just my imagination. It was just a figment of my imagination. It happens. It had been a long, hard day, and I had just imagined it. Couldn't have really happened. I'm not a child anymore to believe in such horror stories about monsters. It's nonsense. A quiet, hysterical laugh escaped my lips as I unlocked the door with my key. The apartment was empty and dark, but at least it was warm. I've never liked winter, it's always cold and dark. And you imagine all sorts of things. Grrr. I grimaced, trying to get the image out of my head. But it didn't work. Oh well, even nightmares aren't always forgotten right away. More precisely, nightmares are usually the things you remember the longest. But it doesn't matter. There was a note from my mom on the wall. It said, "Dear, I hope you had a good day at school. I'll be late home from work. I left some pizza in the fridge for you if you're hungry. Just heat it up in the microwave, that'll be enough. Don't forget to do your homework and put your clothes in the wash. Make sure the washing machine is working. The repairman came yesterday, and we paid him a lot of money for the repair. Love you, Mom." I can't say I was thrilled about doing chores, but I had no choice. Besides, it was a pretty effective way to distract myself from the thoughts that were haunting me. About that creature. I shook my head as if trying to shake those thoughts out of my head. It didn't help, so I decided to eat first, since I hadn't had anything in my stomach since morning. It was probably just a hallucination from hunger, of course. Yes, the thought was crazy, but at least it explained what had happened a little. It was unclear how a few hours could lead to such hallucinations, but I tried not to think about it. Just eat, throw my clothes in the washing machine, and do my homework. Everything was simple, and then my mom would come home, we would have dinner, talk, and all my worries would fade into the background, along with my fears. And anyway, morning was almost over. I couldn't finish my thought because fear gripped me again. No, more like terror, cold, clammy, freezing me to the bone. The same as half an hour ago. It was standing at the end of the hallway, right next to the bathroom where the washing machine was. Looks like I won't be starting with the laundry today, I joked to myself. Exhaustion, the absurdity of the situation, and the blinding horror combined into an ironic joke that flashed through my mind like the first bird of hysteria. I must be going completely insane, I said to myself, keeping my eyes on the creature. What if it realizes I can see it? What then? I quickly looked away, took off my shoes, and, trying to fight the urge to check where the monster was, I slipped into the kitchen. Closing the door and leaning against it with my back, I exhaled loudly. What was this thing? How did it get here? How did it know where I lived and get here even faster than me? I didn't even hear its footsteps, and it couldn't have gotten here faster than me. Moreover, it couldn't have appeared here by accident. That would be an incredible coincidence. My house has 10 floors, and there are a dozen more 10-story buildings next to it. No, such coincidences simply cannot happen. It's impossible, even statistically. Most likely, it's just my imagination running wild. I froze in the middle of the kitchen, lost in thought. I really didn't know what to do, but since I was already in the kitchen, I should at least eat something. It was better to start with something, and making decisions on an empty stomach wasn't the best idea. I couldn't bring myself to leave the kitchen to wash my hands. No, and no again. I didn't want to risk coming face to face with that creature or letting it see me again. It wasn't worth the risk. Besides, I could wash my hands in the sink. So I did that and washed my face as well. Hallucinations like that really do raise questions about a patient's sanity. But I'm not a patient, and I've never had any problems with my head. So I decided to just eat for now and see what happens later. In the refrigerator, I actually found 3 slices of pizza with mushrooms and sausage. I've never liked mushrooms on pizza, so I took a fork from the dish rack and picked the mushrooms off all the slices. I put 2 slices in the microwave to warm up and decided to eat one cold. The microwave needed to be replaced long ago. It was too small and didn't heat very well, but, as in the case of my change of school, we simply didn't have the money for it. Noticing my backpack by the kitchen door, I decided to do my homework for today at the same time. It was just math, so I should be able to finish quickly. Putting my notebook on the table, I decided to check how things were going in the hallway after all. I pressed my ear against the door and listened. Silence. No whispers, no footsteps, no briefing. Only the wall clock in the hallway ticked evenly and soothingly, counting down every second. I don't know how long I would have listened, trying to hear something, I don't know what, but I was brought out of my trance by the ringing sound of the microwave, signaling that the pizza was ready. Turning around, I honestly had to fight the urge to jump up in surprise and shock. 2 meters away from the microwave stood a creature. Again, just as motionless and just as crouched as last time. But I noticed that I wasn't as scared by the creature's appearance as I had been before. No, don't get me wrong, the horror hadn't gone anywhere. But whereas before it had been fear of the unknown, a nightmare about what kind of creature it was that had filled my head with a swarm of guesses and the most terrifying possibilities. Now this fear was simply for my life. An instinctive animal fear. I no longer thought about what it was. I just prayed to all the gods that this creature would leave my house, my life, and my thoughts as soon as possible. Although I understood perfectly well that even if it disappeared now and I never saw this monster again, never heard about it, I would not be able to get it out of my head. It was too much for a 13-year-old boy like me. Too much. The creature didn't move. But, first of all, that didn't really calm me down, because the position it had taken seemed like a cat about to pounce on its prey, ready to tear it apart and devour it in the name of natural selection. And secondly, even though the figure had no eyes, mouth, or face as such, I could clearly understand that it was trying to figure out if I could see it. Or had it already realized that I could see it and was now just playing with me, pretending to be ignorant in order to torment me and enjoy itself? A chill ran down my spine, and I involuntarily jerked as if from a small electric shock. Something had to be done about this. Easier said than done. And even easier than saying it was thinking it. That's why for the first couple of minutes I had nothing but thoughts. I was going over the options. Just walking out of the kitchen would be, at the very least, it would be suspicious. Put yourself in the shoes of a bloodthirsty and terrifying monster who is worried that someone might see him. Maybe he's not bloodthirsty or terrifying, but just wants to play. But since we can't ask him, let's assume that he's a threat to life. You see a man heating up his food in the microwave, the food is ready, he turns to it, and then, a few minutes after just staring at one spot, he turns around and simply walks out of the kitchen. Not suspicious at all. Damn it, the look. Definitely. I realized too late that staring at a spot where you're trying to pretend there's nothing is stupid. Very stupid. I quickly looked away, but it was too late. I didn't even notice how the creature moved towards my right ear. Silently and literally in an instant, it crossed the rather large kitchen and ended up almost right next to me. If I had stretched out my right arm, I could have touched it. Of course, I didn't do that. Nor did I look at the figure. After all, it was better to play this game to the end and just hope that I didn't give myself away. Answer me? Can you see me? The whisper swept through my head like the wind in an empty house. Peering into every crack, into every room, this whisper froze every cell in my body with animal terror. This time, I could hear the intonation in the voice. I could hear that the monster was onto something, that I was on the verge. I had to do something drastic, and I did. Without realizing it, I ignored the creature's question and literally floated, rather than walked, to the microwave. I didn't notice how I ended up next to it. Mechanically, without thinking about what I was doing, I took out the warm pizza and, without turning around, looking at the empty microwave, took a bite, and then another. I ate slowly, delaying the moment when I would have to turn around and see the monster standing behind me, watching my every move, and then opening my head like a can of pineapple. Yes, I didn't have a very optimistic outlook. But no matter how long I ate, no matter how hard I tried to prolong the process, everything has an end. And when the last piece was in my mouth, I clearly understood the cynicism of that phrase about the end. Everything has an end. Yes, it sounds very unpleasant. But delaying the inevitable was unbearable. And so, closing my eyes in the hope that it would save me from a miserable fate, I turned around abruptly. I was ready to feel my limbs being torn off and my head turning into mush. But nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. I stood in the middle of the kitchen with my fists clenched, and there was no one around me. The notebook lay indifferently on the table, dirty dishes lay in the sink, and there was no one else in the kitchen but me. I was completely alone. Took me a while to realize that I was still alive. I searched the entire kitchen for this creature, although it seemed impossible to hide anywhere, especially one of that size, but found nothing. Adrenaline must have hit my head, and, emboldened by the fact that a piece of rebar had flown so close to my head without hitting me, I decided to check the entire apartment for anomalies. It didn't even occur to me what I would do if I found this creature standing in a room behind a door. Most likely, I would have simply died of fear, fallen down dead, and my body would have served as dinner for this monster. But reality turned out to be more favorable to me. After searching all the rooms, opening each one very, very carefully, I found no one. There was no sign of anyone else. Everything was exactly as it usually was. Finding no one in the apartment, I calmed down a little and, thinking that the creature had left my home, I remembered my mother's note. I decided it was better to do my chores because I didn't want to upset her any more than I wanted to die at the hands of a mysterious figure 2.5 meters tall. I threw my clothes in the washing machine, turned it on, and went to the kitchen to do my homework. The notebook was still in the same place as before. Opening it, I was ready to see the pages covered with the question I had grown so tired of. Can you see him? But either the creature couldn't write, or it hadn't thought of that, or it had simply left me. I was very tired from the whole day and felt exhausted from all the stress. So I just accepted the last option as reality and started doing my homework. Time flew by unnoticed, and in the 2 hours while I was doing my homework, I managed to distract myself a little from thoughts about everything that had happened to me during the day and take my mind off my heavy thoughts. And so I finished all my chores. My mother was not home yet. An uncontrollable, instinctive fear began to wash over me again for no reason. Everything had been quiet since the creature last disappeared. There was no noise, no footsteps to indicate that it was still there. But the fear still washed over me in waves, not giving me a second's respite. With every passing second, I became more and more convinced that I was not alone in my apartment and that something was watching me closely, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself to me in the worst possible way. I could have sat there winding myself up like that until the end of time, although I would probably have lost my mind first and my mother would have found me insane. So I decided to pass the time until my mother came home to put me to bed. In sleep, all troubles fade into the background, so at least I would have a chance to distract myself a little. Although sometimes dreams bring the most terrible nightmares, from which you then recover for several days, but I have no choice. Either wait until I slowly go mad, or try to fall asleep and not think about anything. The choice was obvious. Going into my bedroom, I couldn't help but check every corner. I even checked places where it's physically impossible to fit unless you're the size of an ant. I checked the closet, under the bed, behind the nightstand, and everywhere else I could think of. Nothing. Not a single clue. No, I'll have to talk to someone about what happened. Psychologists sign some kind of non-disclosure agreement and all that, and I have no desire to be committed to a mental institution. Besides, I'm not crazy, really. It was more than real. I'm sure of it. Overcoming my fear, I finally closed the door to my room, made my bed, and got under the covers. Warmth spread throughout my body, and despite my intention to listen to what was going on around me for a while, so as not to be caught off guard, I fell asleep. The mountain of emotions and shocks I had experienced in one day was too much and unbearably heavy for a little boy like me. Maybe it was for the best, because who knows what I would have heard if I hadn't fallen asleep right away. I probably wouldn't have been able to close my eyes for a long time, and I didn't even want to consider the possibility of going crazy. I didn't dream. I didn't hear any sounds. All I could see was the black figure I had seen before. It was so clear that I could make out every millimeter of darkness that made up the figure. I had the feeling that, in my dream, the creature wasn't pretending not to know that I could see it. In my dream, the creature did not play with me. I could feel the anger, the desire to kill and cause suffering that drove it. I could feel its body absorbing every particle of light that fell on it, like a black hole. And that made it seem as if its body was bottomless and its fate was already sealed. The creature is darkness itself. After all, the stronger people's fear of something is, the stronger its manifestation in our world. It has always been this way and will continue to be so until the end of time. But every dream is destined to melt away in the face of reality. And this dream was no exception. I don't know how long I slept. Time passes completely differently in dreams. You don't count the minutes or watch the clock. Years can fly by in minutes, and minutes can drag on for decades. But when you wake up, all of that fades into the background. I was awakened by a knock on the door. Loud, but precise. I sat up in bed, trying to figure out if the knock was real, or if I had just imagined it in my sleep. Silence. Could it have been my imagination? I thought I clearly heard a specific knock in. There it is again. No, I'm definitely not imagining things. Someone is persistently knocking on the door. My mother must have finally come home from work. Jumping out of bed and throwing on my pants and slippers, I ran to the front door when I realized something important. My mother had the keys to the door. She wouldn't knock. I stopped in my tracks. There was another knock at the door, and this time I heard my mother's voice. "Honey, open the door. Please. I left my keys at work." I felt like a cornered animal. On the one hand, it was entirely possible. My mother worked for 3 people and could have forgotten her keys. Her workplace was not close by, so she could have decided not to go back for them and just pick them up the next day. And her son would open the door, of course. At such a late hour, I would definitely be home. But on the other hand, I remembered that huge figure. To be more precise, I hadn't forgotten it, because even in my dreams it wouldn't let me go. If you can call it a dream, of course. What if that creature was now knocking on the door and pretending to be my mother so that I would open the door? What if that was how it was trying to find out if I could see it, if I knew about it? I don't know how long I would have stood there indecisively if I hadn't remembered that we had a peephole in the door. Yes, that's not how I imagined the greatest invention of mankind, but now it really seemed to me that a small peephole could easily compete with the rest of mankind's inventions. Probably soldiers in ancient times who looked through loopholes felt the same way. Slowly approaching the peephole and holding my breath, I looked into it. I was ready to see absolutely anything, but not the most obvious and possible option. After all, my imagination was playing a cruel joke on me, and so my expectations turned out to be much more boring than reality, which I was unspeakably glad about. My tired mother was standing behind the door. I didn't want to think about anything anymore and just opened the door for her. "Thank you, dear. I'm sorry I woke you up. I forgot my keys at work again. I should stop being so absent-minded. Otherwise you won't get any sleep, will you?" she said quickly, turning her back to me and starting to take off her shoes. My beloved mother. I hardly heard what she was saying. I was just glad she was there with me. Her beautiful red hair fell onto her shoulders and she looked like a child. I was so glad my mother was back. I missed her. "I'm sorry again for being late from work. A colleague felt ill and I had to cover for her. But I stopped by a Chinese restaurant and bought us something to eat." "Oh, you're probably not hungry, you had pizza, right? Did you find my note? Is the washing machine working?" She turned to me, continuing to ask endless questions. "Now we'll go to the kitchen, eat. I'll tell her everything. We'll laugh together at my imagination, and all my fears and anxieties will disappear forever." My beloved mom. A scream distorted everything around me. The piercing, blood-curdling scream of my dear mother pierced the air around me. Her beautiful blue eyes were filled with terror. "What is that?" She didn't have time to finish. I didn't even notice how the monster that had been chasing me for the last few hours had appeared next to her. It grabbed my mother by the throat and lifted her off the ground. My mother hung in its hand like a rag doll. It was as if she were a hanged man in the Middle Ages. That's what would have happened if I had given myself away to that creature. But it only wanted to bring evil. Only grief and suffering. A white veil of tears covered my eyes, and I could see nothing but my mother struggling to get free, writhing in the creature's grip, which showed no sign of loosening its hold. My mother's wheezing sounds drove me crazy, but inside I knew perfectly well that there was nothing I could do. I couldn't even move. It felt like I was nailed to the floor and I had no chance of breaking free, no chance of moving and changing the inevitable. I fell to my knees when I heard a crack. Loud, distinct. There was no doubt, no thought that it could have been my imagination. It all happened so fast that I didn't even have time to understand. And when I did, it was too late. The lifeless body of my mother, the woman who raised me alone, who carried me in her womb, who sacrificed so much for me, who worked several jobs so that I would never want for anything, the woman who always took care of me, no matter what, who never spared herself, no matter how much I asked her to. She was dead. All I could think about were the moments we spent together in the park. How she would ask me with concern if I had any friends and if I had everything I needed. How we played board games together and how she would let me win. How she sacrificed everything she had just to make me happy. My beloved mother. I believed that I had imagined it. I believed that I had imagined it. I imagined it. You can see me, right?